have by default to try to connect to the strongest signal available. So if you happen to be broadcasting a stronger signal, by default, the workstations will try to connect to that as well. Obviously, web, when it was introduced, has two variations, low and higher encryption. This is what you call the basic protection mechanisms to defend your network. Today, this kind of security is very much not enough to be able to defend your own organizations. So you need to go much beyond that to provide complete protection for the infrastructure. Now, all the tools that we mentioned before, AeroPeak, Grasshopper, Sniffer, NetStumbler, AirSnort, are able to help crack these capabilities. So you have to go beyond that by adding other technologies to complement the deficiency provided by this protocol. Some of the approaches is obviously by introducing technologies such as VPN. So you're now combining not just one level of encryption, but multiple levels of encryption to access within the infrastructure. Now, let's look at some examples. One example of that is by not allowing MAC addresses that have not been identified as acceptable to connecting to the network. So what it means, if the MAC address is not allowed, it automatically refuses it. That means it reduces by much the chance that a workstation would connect to the network. Now keep in mind that this again is not foolproof, because you can actually reset the MAC address of a workstation as well. What we see as well is the capability of introducing technologies such as Radius to complement back-end authentication and complement with things like, for example, single sign-on systems as well. Now, what we also see is the encryption itself being migrated more towards the access points and having a greater deal of functionality. By combining both VPN technology as well as encryption at the access point, this gives us two levels of encryption, meaning that even if somebody was to crack the initial data, the data within the packets that are traveling are still within an additional tunnel, meaning almost much more difficult to access and much more difficult to defend within the infrastructure, meaning hackers would basically be kept out. Now, all these technologies give you extra levels of protection, but even these access points are still vulnerable to certain types of attacks. One example would be what we call denial of service attack, meaning that if the access points are bombarded with lots of requests, or the access points have a higher intensity than the ones within your own organization, you'd still be creating a denial of service condition. Now, as we move to a more sophisticated architecture for wireless technology, we can introduce things like wireless gateways that permit integrated authentication, things like, for example, dynamic user IDs and passwords, or such things as smart card authentication or RSID-based authentication, meaning it gives you one extra level of security not provided in the traditional technologies. Now, obviously, each of the technologies that you're going to be using provides different levels of protection based on the requirements of your organization. So you always should be looking at what am I trying to protect. If you're on an internet cafe, maybe it's just public web access, you just want to navigate a few web pages, maybe no encryption is required. If, however, you have sensitive corporate data, then the appropriate levels of protection should be provided. One of the other important aspects to note about wireless technology is, besides all the encryption mechanisms, authentication mechanisms provided, you should also look at tuning and looking at the physical aspects on how to design your access point location, as well as intensity and strength. So, for example, an access point that would be on the edge of a building would be broadcasting well within the outside walls of the organization, or if you tune the strength of the access point and its location, this will not eliminate, but it will reduce the risk associated. Obviously, you can do a more detailed map of the infrastructure to see how far can the signal be picked up, and then do what are the necessarily adjustments that need to be done. Besides that, you can look at various other countermeasures. Obviously, use the right level of firewalls, port filters, MAC address. From period times, do scanning analysis. Use tripwires within your own infrastructure to make sure if people have been able to penetrate within your own network. Obviously, use things like intrusion detection, intrusion protection. And obviously, good centralized monitoring is always a must in today's infrastructure. Obviously, without centralized continuous monitoring within the infrastructure, you will not be able to know that somebody has come in and being able to penetrate the internal network of your own infrastructure. Besides the 802.11, where we've spent a little bit of time, I just want to add a few quick notes before finalizing the presentation. One is other wireless technologies introduce as many vulnerabilities as the traditional wireless that we're using today. One of them is Bluetooth. Bluetooth actually borrows a lot from 802.11 in the sense that it uses the same frequencies. Actually, 802.11 as a Bluetooth can actually be used to create interference with the existing access points. Bluetooth jumps channels much more fast than the traditional access points, and can actually cause your signal degradation to go down quite substantially. Now, although Bluetooth again has got some basic protection built in, default protection is not always enabled and can easily be cracked or broken into. What really means is, what is the impact to your own individual or the organization if somebody can take advantage of this Bluetooth? Obviously, what do you carry within your own phone or your own PDA? Today, PDAs carry a lot of very vital information. That means you'll be able to take somebody's phone list, customers list, prices, or whatever happens to be stored on that particular device. Now, you have to think in mind as well that the Bluetooth device will also act as sort of like RFID tag. So you as an individual become very easily targetable and very easy trackable within an audience or a group of individuals. Again, as similarly in previous 802.11, for Bluetooth devices there's also the associated scanners that allow you to perform and identify the Bluetooth-enabled devices. Another area that you should also look a little bit is at phone and PDAs. Today we're having other PDAs that are actually running operating systems, happen to be Linux or, for example, Windows, like the Pocket PC. Today, these devices as well, although not Wi-Fi enabled, are also vulnerable to attack as well, and could provide quite a lot of surprises. In terms of finalizing the presentation, we have to understand that at the end, security is not about products primarily. Most organizations have this level of comfort. Oh, you install this box, you get this latest level of encryption, and all of a sudden security comes as a de facto. That is the most further from the truth. So today, security remains, as it was before, as good as your weakest link. So you have to basically follow all the elements that are within your infrastructure, looking for potential entry points. You always have to look at impact. What is the impact if somebody was to penetrate within this section of the network? And any good security implementation always requires three elements: technology, people, and process. Obviously, the time element is extremely important. Although we don't have too much time to cover it in this presentation, you should always focus on the fact that the amount of protection that you have should always be greater in terms of time than the amount of it takes you to detect that an attack has taken place and the time that it takes for you to respond to that attack. Only once you respect this equation will you actually have security for your own infrastructure. Don't forget that security is a continuous job. So if you happen to be in this business, lots of Coca-Cola and lots of pizza for the long nights ahead. Security is not a product, but rather a continuous skilled process. So in order for you to secure your wireless infrastructure, again, provide a structured approach. Examine the vulnerabilities, look for the access points, make sure that they are correctly configured, use the appropriate level of authentication and encryption, make sure that all individuals within the organization are following the appropriate policies. But again, as any good security, you must trust, but you also must verify as well. So a good intrusion